Tonight, we are going to witness the most anticipated match in the history of professional film. For the dozen in attendance, and for the handful listening around the world, it's time for Remake Rumble!
Season's greetings and welcome to Remake Rumble, a podcast that pits a classic film against its remake, the old guard against the new, in a dazzling display of motion picture pugilism. 2 films enter, 1 film leaves. My name is Jonny Lee, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Daniel, the Mac in the Hat Gilmore. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, I'm the reason for the season.
And David, the Vox in Socks Rattigan. Hello, David.
Hello, and might I say a happy holiday season to the pair of you.
Well then, gents, I hope you don't mind, but for our intro today, I think I shall rhyme. Because we're talking The Grinch, that old festive favourite, released first in the 60s, and you bet Hollywood remade it. So be wary of spoilers, if spoilers aren't your thing. Now hark, let's embark to the Remake Rumble ring.
Jonny, you have to warn me before you do poetry.
A humongous Yuletide yellow to you all as Remake Rumble lets loose the Seuss in celebration of the season. First broadcast in 1966, How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a televisual treat for the ages, a beloved festive favorite in which a curmudgeonly green creature with a hatred for the holiday sets out to stop it once and for all. Based on the story by rhyme-happy children's scribe Dr. Seuss, and animated into existence by Looney Tunes legend Chuck Jones, this bona fide Crimbo classic has captivated audiences since the Cold War, and its popularity shows no signs of thawing yet. But can it hold its own against a tag team of titanic temerity? That's right, folks. For the first time in Remake Rumble history, not 1, but 2 remakes enter the ring, turning today's merry match into a 3-way Noel knockout. And here they are now, 2000's How the Grinch Stole Christmas and 2018's The Grinch. The former, a live-action reimagining helmed by Hollywood heavyweight Ron Howard and showcasing the physical comedy of its lead Jim Carrey, and the latter, a computer-animated flick from animation powerhouse Illumination and starring esteemed British actor Benedict Cumberbatch. So, who will win this Christmas quarrel, this titillating tinsel tussle? There's everything to fight for in tonight's Remake Rumble.
So, Daniel, you've always been a miserable Scrooge who tries to ruin Christmas for everyone. So I'm interested to know how you found 1966, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
1966 was actually probably one of my favourite ones, mostly because it was about 25 minutes. So the premise of this is we're meant to be reviewing films, I suppose, but this isn't really a film. It was more like a pretty pleasant TV show.
Yeah, and talking of its length, I thought that the few songs in this film make sense given that it's only 25 minutes. And we'll get onto this, but one of the issues I have with the 2000 one is you have, I think, the same number of songs, but for like a 2-hour film.
You do have the really bad, cloying, sickly sweet Where Are You Christmas number in the 2000s.
How could I forget?
I mean, the amazing thing with those original songs is Dr. Seuss wrote them himself. I mean, he was heavily involved with that original short, TV thing. So I like the authentic Seussian wordplay that's sprinkled throughout.
I never knew he wrote the songs. Is he quite a musical person by heart? Like, was he a musician originally? Do we know? Or?
I don't think he had a musical background. I think his background was in
medicine.
Oh, was it medicine?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, God.
Just the doctor.
Oh, we fell
just
for
a little doctor joke.
for it. Well, the story goes, if I remember this correctly, that he was editing a magazine whilst at Dartmouth College, and I think that for some reason he was fired from his role or told by some member of management that he couldn't be an editor any longer. But he wanted to keep contributing, so he contributed under a pseudonym. And Seuss, I think, was his mother's maiden name.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where the name came from.
But it was pronounced Seuss, because it's like a German name.
I like that. Dr. Seuss sounds much more exciting.
And speaking of music, I like the Fahu Foraz nonsense Latin Christmas carol that you have.
You like that?
I love that as well. Do you not like that?
There's no accounting for taste, I suppose. That's great.
I mean, genuinely, I think there's almost not a frame out of place. I really, really, really like it. Top to bottom, I think it's just great.
I really liked seeing the Looney Tunes style of animation back on my screen again. You can see Chuck Jones just oozes through every single frame. It's really, really cool to see.
Good old Chuck.
It really is fantastic. Like, I know it's cliche, but they just don't make them like that anymore. And it's really refreshing to see that kind of anarchic, ludicrous animation smearing happening all over the place, just slapstick going on.
Absolutely. I mean, isn't it crazy? There was a point in history where every time you go to the cinema, there would be a fresh Looney Tunes cartoon before the feature. I mean, that is a utopian world in which I wish I existed.
The issue with this is, the whole time I'm listening to Boris Karloff, all I'm thinking of is Frankenstein, The Mummy, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just really thinking, I wish I was watching one of those old like horror films instead.
It's funny you say that, because I think that Dr. Seuss himself resisted the casting of Boris Karloff because he worried that exactly that would happen.
Oh, okay. He was a really good narrator, I thought. It was just a shame that I couldn't disconnect it in my head from the things that he'd done previously. I'm not sure if that's like just something like one of my own personal neuroses, but...
Well, the entire time I was thinking of Disneyland. I mean, that's a pretty standard thing for me. But the guy who sang Mean One, that wasn't Karloff. That was Thurl Ravenscroft, who was famously the voice of Tony the Tiger. Everyone loves Tony the Tiger. But he also supplied his voice to a lot of Disney rides. Classic Disney rides. So for me, I was loving it. But I think he isn't credited in the short at any time. So I think a lot of people don't know that it's him, and he's not necessarily that well known.
So why wasn't he credited? Because that was probably the best bit of the whole film.
I know. I honestly don't know. I guess it was a mistake, or maybe he had done something to annoy Chuck Jones. I'm not sure.
Right. He said he preferred Donald over Daffy or something.
David, did you know that this film came out 3 days after Walt Disney's death?
Did it really?
Huh.
Oh my god.
That bad.
We bring up Walt Disney's death quite a lot on this podcast.
It was a tragic moment in history. One of the worst days for humanity.
Some kind of Disney death cult.
Well, Chuck Jones actually, I mean, he was, so there was this strike in 1941 where all the animators were really annoyed at Walt because they weren't being paid enough, they weren't really being credited for their work, and a lot of animation studios were unionizing at that point. And I think Chuck Jones kind of joined in with the strike, and part of that, I think a lot of people have credited him as doing this, but at the very least he was involved in some degree. But there were animators who like paraded like topless down the street with a guillotine, with this kind of Walt Disney dummy that was like decapitated in front of the studio.
That's one way of doing a strike, I suppose. I can appreciate that.
Oh, it was hardcore in those days.
Wow. Speaking of despotic bosses, I do have to mention that this really cemented one distinct part of my brain rot. There's one scene in it where they talk about, like, they sing without flanges and all that kind of stuff. There's an exact note-for-note parody of that in The Simpsons, and all I could think of was Mr. Burns doing it. So
I remember, there's that shot of Mr. Burns where he's got his hand to his ear.
Exactly.
That came into my head, yeah. Very iconic shot.
I couldn't. Johnny, as a cartoon character, what did you think about this one?
So I found that the Who's were much funnier in this than in the other two films, and I really like all those silly made-up names for instruments and games, and it kind of reminded me of sort of like Edward Lear nonsense verse type stuff. And it also made me wonder if there's like more unmined territory there in animation. Like, I'm surprised we don't see more sort of Seussian and nonsense verse influence in animation.
Well, I think part of the reason this was even allowed to exist was because TV was a little bit of a Wild West in those days. I mean, TV was seen as being like the lesser to film at that point. So I think there was a lot of room for experimentation. And I think Chuck Jones, obviously, he's always been an inventive character. So for him, this is just like free reign. And I think CBS, who, there's a channel that aired this, I think they gave them like double the budget of the Charlie Brown special that had been on the previous year. So like it was essentially, here's half an hour slot, go crazy, do whatever you want.
Did you know? So apparently the book is sometimes presented as being a critique of consumerism, and at the time was criticized by some as being pro-communist. But I've always found the message slightly confusing. In fact, I found this not only in the book and also all three films, where on the one hand, the Grinch, right, is sort of justifies his anger at the Who's because he thinks that they're, consuming all this junk. But then in the end, it turns out that actually they're not that bothered anyway, because it's just something more, there's something deeper and profound about Christmas that they enjoy. But I found in a sense that undercuts the anti-consumerist message, because it seems like in the Who world, consumerism isn't actually a problem after all.
I can see what you're saying completely. But I think that's kind of a very specific form of, this is maybe a bit reductive, but American Christianity, where they have this kind of idea where you're not meant to be consumerist, but that's because you'll get a reward if you're not consumerist, if that makes sense. Like, it's initially very spiritual, where they talk about, it's all about love and family and how you have it all in the heart. But these films always descend into, at the end, everyone gets all the special awards. You end up with a big fancy new car or whatever, depending on the film. Like, if you watch the Last Action Hero, well, not Last Action Hero, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Christmas one, Jingle All the Way or whatever it's called.
Oh, Jingle All the Way. Let's have a Jingle All the Way episode.
Exactly.
Forget the Grinch.
Pal, friend, brother. I have been saying that since day one. I would do that gladly. But, at the end of it, they get all the special presents and the toys, even though they were the toys along the way. It's always been like that.
They get their Christmas cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, for me, the original short and then the 2000 film, the thesis kind of feels quite razor sharp to me. I mean, I don't know what you two think about the 2000 version, but I really, really like it. I think it's a really great remake and actually really deepens a lot of the stuff that goes on in the original. But we'll get on to that. But for me, it's the more recent 2018 one where the message is just completely confused. And as you say, I mean, obviously you're not referring to the 2018 one specifically, but for me, it's just like a whole mess of things. Like, it's about the mother is being overworked. So it's kind of about, there's this weird culture of who's being overworked that's never explored. But I mean, that's apparently the main point. And then also about the Grinch being alone at Christmas. Like, it's not about Christmas as a holiday. It's about making sure you celebrate Christmas with other people, whether you're consumerist or not. So for me, it's the 2018 one where the message is confused, whereas I didn't think that was true for the previous two. I mean, I love the stuff in the 2001 where the Grinch essentially lives in a rubbish dump that's all of the stuff that the Who's are consuming and then just throwing away. And the kind of lesson at the end of the film is it's not just the Grinch that needs to learn what Christmas is, but it's also the Who's as well. And it's only Cindy Lou, the little girl, she's the only one who seems to understand what Christmas is really meant to be about. So for me, I really like what they do in that regard.
Yeah, so in the 2000 Grinch, it's like Who's Society are living in some kind of hyper-capitalist self-denial at the beginning, where they cover up their sort of like obsessive consumerism with this veneer of authentic festive joy.
And they go super crazy for it. Everyone's like stampeding over each other, knocking everyone down. They have these crazy celebrations, what they call the Hubilation, all this stuff to kind of show that this is like this warped society that Cindy Lou is just wandering through, like, this can't be how things are meant to be.
And I would say in that respect, the Grinch is a bit like Heath Ledger's Joker. He's an agent of chaos, there to, shake the complacency of Who's Society.
That's true. I never thought of it like that.
And actually, just like...
The Dark Knight is a remake of The Grinch. That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. And just like Batman in The Dark Knight, Cindy Lou refuses to kill the Grinch, even though society would be better off without him. In fact, if there'd been a Dark Knight sequel with Heath Ledger in it, I think there would have been a similar character arc there. And I think by the end, he would be slicing Gotham City's Christmas hog.
That's pretty fair. That's pretty accurate. See, I think it's more like Jared Leto's Joker, but you can't see the face tattoos because of all the hair. They really ruin that. Not very good costume design. Yeah, the 2000 film, I don't know if I'm quite as effusive as you guys about it. I totally appreciate the point of view, and I think, as David was alluding to before, one of the main issues with the 2018 film is that it has no idea what it's trying to say. I can't say that about 2000. It's very clear about what it's doing, very clear about what it's saying. It's a pretty classic, Christmas family film, but with certainly some strong anti-consumerist messages. But for all I remember Jim Carrey being really funny from when I watched it as a kid, I watched it back again, and I'm kind of thinking, is he the master of slapstick that I knew?
Do you know what?
Is he?
Yes, he is.
I completely agree with Daniel, and even though I agree with David's point about the point of the Grinch 2000 being sharper and the Grinch 2018 being much more uneven and lacking direction, I found the Grinch 2000 actually more of a disappointing experience.
Oh.
And I didn't actually like Jim Carrey as the Grinch. I think that there's a lot of... Maybe this is something I would find if I went back and watched other 90s and early 2000s films with Jim Carrey in it, but I felt like there were so many things standing in for actual jokes. Like Jim Carrey, like for instance, he'll often resort to these like very modern American expression, like "What's the deal?" and he'll pull a funny face, like instead of telling a joke. And I just didn't find that very funny. Oh, there's another one where I think it's like Max gets stuck on a roof or something, and he's like, "What are you doing up there?" Like, that's not a joke. It's just a funny voice.
That's not a bad Kerry, by the way. That's all right.
Kerry cast. It starts now.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm vetoing that.
and then-
That's absolutely not happening.
And while we're on the subject of jokes, when he comes to Whoville for the first time, because Cindy Lou says that he's going to be whatever it is, he's the Christmas champion, and he's up on the stage and he says, "I was told there'd be a check." And actually, it sounds more like the villain in Men in Black, the first film, with the insect guy squeezed into his human skin. He says, "I was told there would be a check." And they're like, "Oh, Grinch, there's not a check." And then 2 minutes later, he just repeats the joke. He says, "Are you sure there's not a check?" I'm like, yeah, just...
That made me laugh. I mean,
God bless you.
I know, maybe I'm a simpleton, unfortunately. What I didn't like from that same scene, where I would agree with you, absolutely, and I think this runs through the film, and it's kind of, you can tell it's a film from, that was incubated in the late 90s, early 2000s,
right?
Where he lands, the Grinch is coming down from Mount Crumpet, he's fired down the garbage chute, and he flies through the crowd, and then he lands on Martha Mayhew's chest, right? And it's like isn't that hilarious that he's on her chest?
Yeah.
And, it's just a bit raunchy, bit cheap, bit gross, really. And then there's a lot of pop cultural references, like the slow-mo Chariots of Fire stuff, which isn't not funny, in my opinion, but I don't like the fact that it's almost... It doesn't want to be sincere to a point, I think, which I think is more of a problem with the 2018 version. I mean, there's a lot in that where, it's like holding the source material at arm's length, like when it does the You're a Mean One song in 2018. Where it's this Tyler the Creator remix version, and it's obviously trying to get on the level of the kids. You know what I mean? It's not. It doesn't want to do a big gutsy, funny, ridiculous rendition of a nonsense song. It's trying to be like, oh, kids don't like that kind of thing. Now we need to make sure that it's got a contemporary artist, and so I think there are elements of that in 2000, but it's more the 2018 version for me where that stuff really tips over the scale. I think there's enough of it in 2000 version where it's, for me, I thought it was quite funny, but I mean I appreciate that it's not everyone's cup of tea.
I think I felt as well that the way that Jim Carrey plays the Grinch doesn't really fit with the Tim Burton-esque sort of modern America meets fairy tale. He's basically playing Ace Ventura in a green cabbage costume.
Yep.
And what's wrong with that? I signed up for that.
I mean, the Grinch 2000, which I'm going to keep calling it because it sounds very futuristic and like a PS1 game, but the Grinch 2000 is a film of its time. I think that's the main problem. It's not necessarily above itself. That was just the style of comedy at the time. You had these things like, what's the deal? Who's this guy all about? Like you were saying before. But that's more forgivable and more understanding for why it's not aged as well as 2018, which, as you said, it's so unwilling to be sincere. It's so unwilling to commit to its source. It has no affiliation with Dr. Seuss whatsoever. It is basically just like The Secret Life of Pets, but with a big green hairy man. Whereas if you look at the Grinch 2000, I mean, it's so 2000. You have... those people who go to the mountain, one of them basically looks like TLC, the other one's got gelled tips and long shorts. It's so 2000.
But again, I like that. To me, that seemed kind of tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, completely.
It almost seemed like a kind of Rebel Without a Cause-esque kind of, rebellious teenagers. I felt like they were kind of aware that it was slightly ridiculous. And, the costume design throughout the film, I really liked. I think there's a lot that, I think the level of detail... costume, everyone when they're wearing pajamas at the end, everyone has their own character specific set of pajamas. Or when Cindy Lou has a weird costume where she has a cup of liquid on her head and there's real liquid in there, sloshing around.
Yep, and the biscuits and the plate. And did you notice the mother had the same hat with a bigger cup?
I did notice that.
Genius.
Did you notice at the end her handing a plate of green eggs and ham to Max?
No, I didn't notice that. Really?
That's a nice little touch.
That's cool.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I guess you two might say you can't redeem it with some references, which I get, but, that's quite nice. It's a nice little thing.
It's so difficult to like a film that has Smash Mouth in it. It really is.
Does it? When?
So there's they're having the party at Christmas before the baby lands. And I don't know if it is Smash Mouth, but if it is at Smash Mouth, it's basically Smash Mouth.
But again, that's another scene I love, which obviously it moves away from the original book, and now we have a tragic backstory for the Grinch, which, I was nervous when it came back up. I'd forgotten about the flashbacks, but actually I really, really enjoyed it. I loved how you had all these babies arriving in baskets And then the Grinch shows up, and it's this tattered black umbrella, and it knocks the baby away. It flies off into the distance, like screaming. And then it's this weird, creepy puppet animatronic thing that they have in a little chair, and it's gooing and garring, and I thought it was great.
There's a sense of magic. I'll give you that. There's completely a sense of magic. Like, the set design is really evocative. I think the cast was really good. I don't think, was it Bill Irwin who did the dad? Like, I think he was actually a surprisingly good supporting actor, considering like the little slapstick he had. Like, he gave it his all. Like, there's a lot of really good performances in there. I just wasn't totally engaged with it the whole way through. Like, at some point I had to use the toilet, and then I got up and I found it was about 45 minutes through, and I just thought, man, this has like an hour left to go. There was a lot of filler, and part of the problem was that, to come back to Jim Carrey, I don't want to keep ragging on him about it, but he can't leave a joke alone. When there's like a big slapstick punchline, like he gets smacked in the head by a hammer or something, he can't leave it there. He has to have a little rejoinder, has to like stick in a little one-liner, and you don't need it, and it made it feel flabbier, and it made the whole thing feel like it took twice as long. I think that was the main problem for me, and it's why I didn't love it. I still liked it. It was fine. Like, I didn't mind it. But yeah, going from the memories you have as a kid to watch it again as an adult, it didn't quite hold up to what I wanted it to be.
Coming back to the origin thing, which I think is right, like, you need to have some kind of backstory, or you don't need to, but I can understand why you would have a backstory for the Grinch in a feature-length film. Although I will say that I do like in the book and the 1966 film where, you know, it's not explained why the Grinch is the way he is. And the narrator runs through a number of different possibilities that, you know, according to legend, why is he the way he is? And I love the idea that it could be because he has ill-fitting shoes, that he's such a grumpy bastard. But anyway,
just like the Joker.
Just like the
making
Joker.
his origin story.
That's right. So coming back to the 2000 film, there are little details even in the backstory, like the fact that he eats glass, which don't work for me. Like, why glass? Why is that a thing? And I feel like this film.
I'm thinking about it. That he eats the Santa plate.
This film, for me, is composed of lots of ideas, separate ideas, which at the time the filmmakers thought were really funny, and they shoved them all together. So you have things like the eating the glass, you have things like the slow-mo Chariots of Fire parody, and none of it comes together into a coherent whole.
But it had ideas.
Sure.
Which is more than I can say for other films.
See, to me, it sounds like you're describing the recent remake.
Well, I'm also describing the recent remake.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm going to say it now, controversially. I actually enjoyed myself more with The Grinch 2018. And I don't think it's a good film.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Let me make this very clear. I don't think it's a good film. I think it's also very uneven. It also lacks direction. And most irritatingly, it recycles so many elements from previous Illumination Studios films, which I think Daniel touched on already. So, for example, you've got stuff like the slowing things down as characters are moving really fast, and some out-of-control vehicle, and your tongue flies out. You've got things like the strange, you know, normally cross-eyed animal who makes a funny noise following you around. All that's like really familiar. But having said all that, I think it's a really mediocre film, but it still kind of carried me along. And I'm not going to remember this film, but it was fine. Whereas I found in the 2000 film, whilst it's much more ambitious and it does have ideas, it did, I think, actively irritate me. And I was glad when it was over.
Huh. I didn't expect that. That's quite dramatic. I'm not sure how to react to someone saying they preferred that. Again, I don't think either of them were fantastic films, but man, 2018 was a real struggle. I completely checked out about half the way through, and I just stopped taking notes.
It might also be because I didn't go in with high expectations. I'm not the biggest fan of these Illumination Studio films. Like, I feel like I really know what to expect when I go in to see one. And it kind of checked all those boxes. So I was like, yeah, okay, you know, it was what it was. But yeah, it just didn't irritate me in the same way that Jim Carrey's pulling wacky faces instead of actually inserting a joke.
I'd rather be irritated than bored. Say what you want about the 2001s. I know it's got all this gross out stuff, like the way they took the Grinch was maybe a bit, like, not the way I would take it, but at least they had like a perspective, at least they tried, at least they had one story they were trying to tell well. With 2018, they had like 3 different things that they had no idea what they're doing. You know, like this put upon mother and the kid trying to do the Santa heist, and then the Grinch doing God knows what. Like, is he grumpy? Is he like a villain? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, they didn't seem to understand the character at all. I mean, for me,
At
2000
all.
and Grinch was like, he's gross, which I personally like that. Like, they just really went all in with him being this totally grotesque creature that is just, everyone is terrified of him. Whereas here, for some reason, they just completely sanded him down, and it was to the point where he just apparently just walks around Whoville to do his shopping.
Totally.
And no one cares.
Yeah.
And I just don't get what the point of that was.
Wait, okay, so if I was going to defend it, I would say that they're trying to take it in a slightly different direction. And I think it's very intentional that they're making the Grinch more of a part of Who society, right? So he still goes into Who town for shopping. In this film, he's more the archetype of the misanthropic old man who lives on the edge of town, right? He's basically Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino.
Yeah, okay. Now I'm back in. Keep going.
And you have things like he's nice to, Max the dog is his only friend, who he's actually genuinely very nice to. So Max is no longer the abused slave pet. He is the one loyal friend. And I think consistent with that, they try to give him a more grounded backstory, which makes sense with what they're trying to do in the film. So instead of just being this kind of impish figure with no particularly defined backstory of the original book and the original short film, or this, you never really find out who he is in the 2000 film, but, he's brought in by a stork like all the other Who babies, but something seems to have gone wrong with this one, and he's just kind of like naturally a strange, vicious, vile little creature. With this one,
and again, that's funny.
That's funny, yeah, sure. In this one, he's more of an outcast. He's the weird-looking orphan who observes the happy families of Whoville celebrate Christmas, and he's traumatized by his loneliness. And to its credit, I think one thing that does do is that it makes sense of why Christmas specifically is something that the Grinch doesn't like, because it's the holiday that symbolizes family and home, and so comes to represent his trauma. Whereas you might say in the 2000 film, there's no particular reason why he should hate Christmas, right? He starts off hating Christmas before he's bullied in school. So I think, to give it its due credit, I think that kind of makes sense for what they're going to do. And I'm not trying to say any of that works, but I think we should also appreciate that they know that they're doing that. Like, they do know that they're trying to make him a more grounded figure.
But why make the Grinch grounded, right? I mean, this is a story by Dr. Seuss, who's known for these completely crazy stories. To then say, oh, we'll just have him as a hairy green man who goes and does shopping. And, to me, it seemed like the directors had watched Wallace and Gromit and said, oh yeah, let's do like a green hairy version of Wallace, because he's an inventor with a pet dog, and there's no reason why he's an inventor. Again, it doesn't add anything to the character. It doesn't make sense that he's an inventor. They never outright say he's an inventor, but you look around his house and it's all these crazy inventions everywhere, and which maybe they got from the 2000 version, because I know there's a lot of crazy contraptions in the Grinch's house. But I got the sense, and I think the production designers talk about this actually in the 2000 version, but that's kind of just he lives in a rubbish tip, so all that stuff is just like, you can ostensibly say that that's junk that's been thrown away, that he's scattered around. Here it's like his house is actually nice and clean, but then also partly gothic, like he has like an organ, but then also just has like a 1950s suburban American kitchen.
It feels like direction by committee. That's what this feels like. I'm not saying you're wrong, Jonny, but I think you're giving it way too much credit. I don't think this was designed with anything in mind other than selling tickets and making toys. I can't see any reason other than that to essentially just homogenize everything. There's no Seussian element to this whatsoever.
I agree.
Absolutely nothing.
Maybe I can put it this way. So there's no need for this to be a Grinch film. I completely agree. I'll come back to that in a second. But on the other hand, if I was going to write a Christmas story from scratch, then I could do worse than having as a protagonist an orphan who's traumatized by observing the idyllic family Christmases of Whoville. Like, I think that kind of makes sense as a premise, but the problem is there's no need for it. I don't
disagree, but again, you don't really get much of that backstory.
Agreed.
You do see it,
completely.
But it's a scene that's only kind of hinted at, and it almost suggests that maybe there's going to be a kind of more full-fat flashback in like 30 minutes. It just never comes.
Agreed.
If you take out that orphanage scene, what in the film suggests to you that the Grinch is in any way ostracized from society? In fact, it seems almost entirely self-inflicted if you kill that scene. Obviously, I know that scene is in there, so you can't really discount it, but at the same time, it's like, what, a minute, maybe two?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they don't build on that character. It's not actually established in any other way other than just, I mean, like, he goes out shopping, like, everyone seems to love him. Everyone's mad for the Grinch.
I would agree with you. The whole thing's very undercooked. And things like the mother struggling to raise the children, Cindy Lou, all she wants for Christmas is for Santa to help out her mother. Even that felt really underdeveloped.
So developed.
I mean, for one thing, whilst it's true that she seems to be a single mother raising 3 children, at the same time, it's hard to get a grip on exactly what the problem is. Like, she seems to be coping. We never see a scene of her not coping. And the other, I think, tension there is that Whoville is a much more straightforward, idyllic town, albeit seen through the eyes of like a contemporary white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But like otherwise it's this kind of utopia. And it's hard to see how that kind of society would, if it is so idyllic as we're led to believe, would let things get too bad for her.
If you're going to do that, jump both feet in. If you're going to tell me a slice of life story about a mother who's struggling and a kid who just wants her mum to be happy for Christmas, do that. If you want to do a story about this outcast who wants to try and find himself in the middle of Christmas and then commit a crime and then, gets let off for it when he finds the true nature of humanity, do that. That's what the Grinch is all about. If you're going to try and combine them, give both of the stories enough room to breathe and write them enough that I get anything out of them. But instead what they did was they split the middle, watered everything down, included a big fat reindeer for what can only be described as no reason because he has it written out halfway through. And then and then they just go, oh, here you go. Here's a Christmas film. Like, I totally get what you're saying, Jonny. Like, it's not terrible. It's not the worst film I've ever seen, but it's almost worse than bad. It's boring. It's completely inconsequential. It has nothing to say. It does nothing. It has no personal point of view. It has no artistic vision. Everything stylistically it's done has been done in The Secret Life of Pets. It's worse than bad. It's pointless. And that's what's offending me so much.
I agree with a lot of that. And I think another issue I have, another tension in the film, is between the more realistic, grounded setting, but then lots of other incongruous elements. So, I mean, for one thing, like, why is the Grinch this kind of green goblin creature in this otherwise fairly normal world? Like, why do you have 500-foot tall Christmas trees? Why do you have those creepy carol singers following him through the street everywhere he goes? Clicking their fingers in the sort of like West Side Story dance moves.
But Jonny, the goat screamed like he was from the internet. Did you not see that? And then he wore those like pants that said like, sexy arse or whatever it said. It's like, can't unsee.
Also, is this supposed to be on Earth? Because there are lots of explicitly Christian carols alongside Michael Jackson and other pop songs playing from the radio, right? So in whatever plane of existence Whoville exists, presumably both Jesus and Michael Jackson have revealed themselves to the Who's.
Well, I mean, we didn't discuss that in the Grinch 2000, but I think that was a stroke of genius where they had it set in a snowflake, which is kind of a reference to another Seuss story, Horton Hears a Who, where there's a whole world inside a speck of dust. And I think that's Whoville as well in that. Whereas here they kind of took that idea and was like, okay, we'll do it. It's Christmas, so we'll have it as a snowflake. I mean, the only problem with that is, and I thought this when I was a kid and I still think it now, seems very whimsical and nice, but does that not suggest straight after the Grinch carves the roast beast, the world implodes because the snowflake melts or something? I mean, it's a slightly scary vision.
I'm not sure I'm ready for the philosophical ramifications of Dr. Seuss.
Well, this is what I mean.
Actually, speaking of which, though, am I right in saying that one of the co-directors of this also directed the Lorax?
That probably is right. I mean, Illumination made the Lorax, yeah. And then I think it was Blue Sky Studios did the previous animated Seuss film.
Right.
I mean, this is probably a good point to say, actually. There's a really interesting history with these adaptations where Dr. Seuss himself, Ted Geisel, he was very, very, very against his books being made into films because he'd had a bad experience with Hollywood in the past. So he was always like, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And the only reason he did the 60s Grinch cartoon was because it was TV and it felt like, as I was saying before, it's a slightly different world where the rules aren't quite the same. But when he died, his wife, Audrey Geisel, basically started selling the rights to these things just to everybody. So suddenly you had movies being made. There's even a theme park land in Universal Studios in Florida, which is crazy, called Zeus Landing. There's a Cat in the Hat ride that you can go on.
Okay.
So she, was selling it everywhere. And a lot of people, obviously, maybe quite rightly, have accused her of maybe exploiting things. But she disliked the Cat in the Hat with Mike Myers so much that she basically said, I don't want to do any more films that are live action in the Seuss world. So that's why we've now had this kind of string of plasticky CG Seuss films, basically.
I mean, she might be crazy, but she's not wrong. I'm basically spent at this point. I've got nothing else to say about the Grinch. I'm so overloaded with Christmas.
Okay, well, perhaps it's time for a festive quiz.
Oh, hold me back.
Okay.
Couldn't stop me if you tried.
Okay, now there will be a special Remake Rumble Christmas gift for the winner, so I want you to try your best this time, Daniel.
I try every time, but you rig it. That's the problem.
Okay, so it transpires that David actually knows the answer to the first question.
Yeah, of course he does. What a surprise.
But Daniel probably wasn't paying any attention to the conversation, so I'm going to...
who's the name of the man who runs the Disney Corporation? All right, who knows?
Here we
what
go.
A riddle.
Let's see how much you've been paying attention, Daniel.
Right.
Okay, question 1. Thurl Ravenscroft, who sang the song You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch in the 1966 film, was best known as the voice of who? Was it A, Tony the Tiger? Surely not. B, Captain Crunch? C, Mighty Mouse? Or D, Rasta Mouse?
Okay, so do I get to go first? Because David's basically cheated and
I think so. Go on.
Great, that's fine.
Go on.
God, I wish it was Rasta Mouse. Could you imagine? Obviously, it's Tony the Tiger, but how old was he when he did Tony the Tiger then? Because he's been going for a while.
I'm not sure when Tony the Tiger came onto the scene, onto the
He
breakfast
was
scene.
Birthed out of his egg sac from the Kellogg's birthing pools. Yeah, well, there's some homework for you.
All right, question 2. In 2000's The Grinch, Jim Carrey's costume is covered in what animal hair? A, yak, B, camel, C, Highland coo, or D, human child?
Ooh.
So technically D, but that's only because it was actually Jim Carrey's real hair.
Ah, so you went real method with this one.
That's
This was
right.
another Man on the Moon rendition from Carrey.
That's right. I like the way you said Highland coo, but that's mostly the only reason why I want to say C.
You're welcome. Normally I charge.
Thanks, brilliant. Cheers.
Okay,
Love it.
so you're going for C, Highland coo, and David, what are you going for?
It's yak. It's yak. I've done my homework.
Oh, for
God.
It's yak. In fact, if I leaf through my notes, I might even be able to give you
leaf
some
away.
statistics.
Might be able to tell us which yak.
Statistics for this.
Oh, crikey.
Okay, well, whilst you're doing that, question 3. Who was considered for the role of the Grinch in the 2000 film? Was it A, Robin Williams, B, Jack Nicholson, C, Daniel Day-Lewis, or D, Robert Downey Jr.?
God, Jack Nicholson. God, I'm dreaming of it. Daniel Day-Lewis?
Okay, you're going
Was he in the running
you're
for
going
it?
Daniel Day-Lewis. Okay, and David?
I think Robin Williams makes the most sense, but I love the idea of a Jack Nicholson Grinch, so I'm going to have to go for Jack Nicholson on this one.
Well, the correct answer is Jack Nicholson.
Oh,
wow.
Why is today the day my dreams come true? Why is that happening now?
Imagine that. I mean, that's really fascinating.
That is the only believable way that I could be terrified of the Grinch, though. Jack Nicholson is like, hey, I'm here. I hate Christmas.
Well, before we move on, actually, do you want me to tell you about the Carey's yak suit?
Please do.
Ugh.
Well, they were individual yak hairs that were sewn onto a lycra spandex suit. They were sewn on and tied twice, and making the suit from scratch took 4 months. Apparently, Carey likened it to being buried alive on a daily basis.
Wow, okay. A lycra suit covered in yak hair.
And I have another fact, actually, but I'm worried that it may trip on
Is this going to
Johnny's
awaken
toes.
another sexual fetish in me, or is this going to be fine?
Well, there's only one way to find out, I suppose.
Okay.
Apparently, Carey had to train, I believe, with someone who was involved with the CIA in dealing with the suit because it was such a traumatic experience. And that's no joke, that's real.
Just like Jack Ryan.
Just like Jack Ryan.
Unbelievable. Well, hang on, what could they teach you? At what point in the field have the CIA ever been covered in yak hair? Except like maybe, I don't know, some deep state collusion in Peru or whatever. What is going on?
It's classified information, Dan, I'm sorry.
It is
can't reveal
classified.
that.
I'm sorry for asking. Sorry, Agent.
I was actually going to include a question about that, funnily enough, but I didn't want to accidentally activate Daniel. I know he's a sleeper agent. Okay, next question. 2000's The Grinch currently sits at number 2 spot of highest grossing Christmas films of all time. What is number 1? Is it A, It's a Wonderful Life? B, Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause? C, Home Alone? Or D, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York?
Oh, you See, you knew that would happen, though. You knew you'd say Home Alone and everyone would go for Home Alone, so you had to include the second one.
I was thinking just that.
See, this is the part where I'm not playing the game, I'm playing Jonny, where I'm trying to figure out if he'd be awful enough to include the second one just to be a despicable creature, or if he's actually doing it because it's the real one.
This is the part where I'm searching Google for the answer.
Don't you dare! You can't possibly... Teacher, you just hear what you're saying?
I won't.
Unbelievable.
I won't search Google. I'll use Yahoo, don't worry.
No, you won't. No one's ever said that. You'll use Lycos like a real working class man. I'll tell you.
So what's it going to be?
Oh, you know, I have the same dilemma that you're having, Dan. I think... I don't know if Home Alone 2 is generally perceived as being like the preferred one, so I'm not totally sure, but I mean, they're pretty big. They're big hitters. I'm going to say Home Alone 1. I think Home Alone 1 probably had... Yeah, Home Alone 1. Let's say Home Alone 1. The original, the classic.
I'm going to say Home Alone 2, but only because I believe that Donald Trump has used his starring role in it and has used White House funds in order to buy out hundreds of millions of copies, which he's now used to, I don't know, lie in the Oval Office.
Well, the correct answer is, of course, as any idiot would know, Home Alone.
God, you
yes.
stupid
Google was
idiot.
right.
I do
Stupid bloody idiot.
I do vaguely remember reading somewhere that the Grinch 2000 had actually overtaken Home Alone, but this is according to Forbes magazine, and they've never been wrong.
Oh, that rag. Whatever. They don't know anything.
They've never been wrong, except that time that they said that Lehman Brothers would stand the test of time.
That's right.
Okay, final question. According to an interview about his role in the film, what feature of Christmas makes Benedict Cumberbatch feel most Grinchy? Is it A?
Oh my. Okay.
Is his lycra suit covered in yakka?
Is it excess shopping, excess drinking, excess packaging, or excess wind?
Excess packaging?
I think it's got to be excess drinking, because if it was excess packaging or the other one, that seems very counter the Grinch story. But then again, the Grinch 2018 was very confused in its messaging, so it could go anyway.
The thing is, for Benedict Cumberbatch, excess drinking is probably like, I don't know, 3 snifters of port or whatever. If that's probably the right answer, but unfortunately Dave has already said it, so I'm not allowed to say the same answer. I'm going to go for the excess shopping, because that is also consumerist or whatever. It's the drinking one, just say it, just do it.
Well, the correct answer is in fact excess packaging.
What?
Huh?
What?
Hey,
He must say that as a joke.
Just reporting
This
facts.
is the part
That's a
where
Cumberbatch cackle.
it's a classic Cumberbatch classic.
It's true.
What does he mean? I don't understand what he
What
means.
do you mean it's true, Jonny?
What I mean is, it is true. That is what makes him feel most Grinchy.
But there's no, like, the interviewer didn't then go, what are you talking about if you suffered from a head wound?
To think this man went to private school.
So wait, did the interviewer ask him what makes you feel most Grinchy? I mean, what kind of question's that?
I mean, that's the
I
typical
don't
fluff
know. I
piece.
just copy and pasted this from IMDb.
Like the like Robert De Niro, what makes you feel the most Irish? You know, like it's the classic question you always ask. But the fact that he didn't like expand on that, no one went, Benedict, what are you on about? Your words mean something. You can't just say something like that and then leave it.
Right. Well, to sum up, I think that's 4-2 to David. No surprises there.
Oh.
Did I get 2? I didn't think I got any.
you got 2.
I legitimately thought I got 0 points there.
Did the yak hair information, did that add to the score?
Not this time, no.
Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. I mean, you know what? It's Christmas. Let it add to the score and then give an extra point to Dan. I think that's the least I could do.
I don't need your pity points. How dare you?
It's not pity, it's Christmas.
It is Christmas. All right, I'll take the points.
It's a mince pie point.
Oh, I do like mince pies. That is right.
All right. I think it's time that we went to the scorecards. So,
It is.
who was the winner of this seasonal skirmish? David, let's start with you.
I think it's a tough question. I mean, it's almost as tough as the what do you do to feel most Grinchy question. I think it's definitely between 66 and 2000. So it's between the How the Grinch Stole Christmas is as opposed to The Grinch, right? So I'm kicking The Grinch out. I don't know what The Grinch 2018 was up to. Terrible from start to finish. Very boring, very dull. Didn't know what it was saying. The animation was stiff. The animation was robotic. It was terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. 1966 is a classic. I think Chuck Jones is a genius. I think Dr. Seuss is a genius. I think combining them together is incredible. So I'm hard pressed to say that it shouldn't win, but equally How the Grinch Stole Christmas 2000 is this incredible live-action realization of Jones's work. Jim Carrey's the perfect cartoon man in human form. I love all the crazy production design. I love the way it's been realized. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe I should go out there and say it's 2000. I think 2000 is the best, but it's, it's almost as good as the original. I think the original is great as well.
And you, Daniel?
I think it has to be the 1966 one. Not just because it's shorter, but because it has zero fat. It is all pure Christmas. It's very well produced, very well animated. I think it's pretty timeless. It's not the best Christmas film in the world, but at the same time, it never outstays its welcome. It says what it needs to say, and it gets out. I've got a lot of respect for that, and it's also clearly done with a lot of love. 2000, I agree with about the set design, the costume design. I think it's got a real sense of place. It does have a sense of direction, which I really appreciate. The classic rubber man that everyone loves, Jim Carrey, I don't think rises above the role, so I'm not going to say 2000. And 2018, I'm going to give it the respect it gave me and just not mention it. So Jonny, just say 2018 so we can have a nice one-on-one draw. And
we'll get there. So for me, the original 1966 film is a lovely, lean wee film. I think it captures the spirit of the book whilst adding its own little animated sparkle to the story. The other two films, I think, are not nearly as funny or sharp as they need to be, and neither of them have a strong enough direction. Very uneven, very hodgepodge. But I personally had a marginally better time with the 2018 film, mostly because it didn't annoy me as much. So definitely the 1966 film is the best, followed by 2018 and then 2000.
Wow.
Outrageous.
Absolutely outrageous. Did you turn the TV on when you had it on? Because we had moving images and sound that was happening.
Was I watching Jingle All the Way?
Oh, I wish. You
know what? I hear a lot of people say about Jingle All the Way, oh, it's a bad film, but it's a great Christmas film. No, I think it's a great film and a superlative Christmas film.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we shall wrap up there. Thank you for your joyful company, gentlemen, and thank you for your attention, dear listeners. Why not treat yourself this festive season and follow us on Apple Podcasts or your other preferred podcast player. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter to receive such gifts as the latest Remake Rumble rumours, slanders, and updates on Daniel's War on Christmas. And with that, happy Christmas to all, and to all, a good fight.
Happy holidays, compadres.
Bye.
The true message of Christmas is that only those who work hard deserve presents. And
that's right. The end of the Grinch thing just turns to the camera and goes, "Only the strong survive. The weak will perish. Diminish the excess population."